I was just asking because Brianna Greenwood, I don't know if you have met her, but she was in person here in the office. Trying to get the right slide here. Did I share my screen? She came in and talked about breath work as our parting thoughts. It was really interesting because she's got a cool story. We have a friend here locally, Louis Hamner. He does breath work at his place, and I've done a couple of events at his studio and invited some people there. And she went and had such an amazing experience that now she's gone to certification training to become a certified breathwork facilitator. And she does, I think, multiple times per week around her county breathwork sessions. And it's just kind of completely changed her life. And so she had some really good insights on that. I think the recording is on Team Limitless. Yep. If you wanted to kind of see her thoughts on that. And then we did actually a little practice thing, but do either of you do breath work of any sort, like Wim Hof or anything with breath work?
I don't know, but I do follow Brianna on, I think, Insta. And so I've seen some of her stuff.
Okay, yeah, she's gotten way active on there, posting stuff. Hillary, have you ever done any sort of breath work?
No, I haven't.
Well, maybe we should do another event at Louis. It's interesting. Everybody has a different experience, and then some people continue to do it or whatever. It's just like a, I don't know. Some people have a completely life-changing experience like Brianna did. It's really interesting. She didn't know what to expect. And part of her story, Shantae, I don't know if you've seen this on Instagram, but she had a really tough upbringing. Her grandfather pretty much raised her. Didn't have a good home life. Rough start in life, and has had some struggles dealing with the past that way. Well, anyway, the reason I bring that up is because after the breathwork session, she shared with me that, because she was bawling, she was just sobbing. She was just like very, very, very emotional. And she told me that she never cries. In fact, when her grandfather passed away, who actually raised her, she said is probably the person she was closest to in her life. She didn't even cry when he passed away, at his funeral, anything, just those emotions weren't there. Well, the breath work brought this out in her, and that's part of her experience. The other thing she shared with me was during her experience, she kind of like had a conversation kind of, or a dialogue with a version of herself. And that version of herself told her she was a badass. And the way she explained it, she says, and I actually believed her. For the first time, she got this burst of confidence. And it was just an amazing thing to hear from her, because with breath work, if you're just present, she just decided, you know what, I'll just see what happens. Just let everything go, no expectations, whatever. So when she's present in just her breath or whatever, and she's not the only one. So it was really kind of neat to have her on here, because I've kind of watched her journey too, Shantae, and it's really fun to see really how much more outgoing she is, and involved in events and group settings and networking and sharing something that impacted her life with other people. So
yeah,
something to look into for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, short of doing some sessions and exercises in our conferences and such, there have been some moments there, but it is like so hard to focus and I think be fully present when you have like a ton of people around you. But I think this sounds like a great opportunity for another pool party at your place, and Brianna could lead us in some breath work.
Yes, absolutely. We actually, I think we talked to her about that and asked her, have you ever done an outdoor session? I don't think she has yet. We definitely have the space for it. So yeah, we'll have to put something like that together for sure. But it's kind of, what you just said is kind of the point, Shantae. It's like, it is so hard to be present. It is so hard to shut everything else out. And I think for me, that's what I enjoy about it. I honestly, I haven't done it for the last couple of weeks. I just kind of broke my habit there for a minute, but I have the Wim Hof app on my phone. Wim Hof is, he's called the Iceman. He's like, you learn a lot about cold plunging and cold baths and cold water, but also breath work. And the app is kind of like a guided session in breath works. And it helps me become present. It really does help me start my day and just kind of like block everything else. I like to start the day at ground zero. I mean, you wake up and the mind's already going a million miles an hour, especially if you wake up next to Lynn. Because she's just going all over the place. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, give me a second, you know? So anyway, that for me,
Yeah.
it's just really good.
It sounds great. I think that it's easier for Shade to pull off. The times that I have tried, I will like lock myself in my closet, like literally go in my closet to try to go away from the kids and the noises and the dogs and everything. And I just can't escape the sound.
You just can't do it.
No.
Maybe you need some noise canceling headphones or something like that.
Mhm.
Where somebody could be screaming for you and you still wouldn't hear it. Cool, you got any thoughts on that? Zero. I didn't see this. Shantae or Hillary, did either of you watch the?
This is for Utah only.
Oh, it was just Utah. Oh, never mind. Hillary, you were just getting back from
Oh.
you probably didn't even know about it.
No, I actually listened in.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I missed it. I was gonna try and listen to it before today because Ashley put this slide in here so that we could get some thoughts on that. Eric, I know you watched it. Ashley watched it as well. Hillary, did you have any takeaways from that?
I'm trying to remember that. I think there was one thought I did have on that yesterday. That was yesterday, and I don't remember it now. But give me a second, and I might remember what it was.
I love that. I had a thought yesterday, but that was yesterday.
I remember going, oh yeah, okay, that's something I need to do, and I think it was mainly like, oh, I need to figure that out a little bit more because I feel like it was kind of very just kind of like brushed over, and I'm like, I need to figure out what that is exactly, you know. But but yeah, I did listen in, and I think it was helpful when it came to like understanding what kind of, I think, paperwork we kind of need to have, you know, when we're working with our clients for getting them prepped and understanding understanding just, you know, agency and things like that. So
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
So I have attended a few of the national ones with Leo and Holly, and one of them had Kendall like sort of as the MC in between them, right? And then just one of Oregon State meetings to reference. I find that everybody shares something slightly different and slightly conflicting. But the landscape, what they've emphasized, is continuously changing. So we're all kind of along for the ride and just really leaning into your state broker team, because like the first day that this came out and was public, right, I had a 0% BAC situation. And so I leaned heavy into the state broker team to get all the language right, then also worked with the lender to make sure we wouldn't have underwriting hiccups down the road based on what I put in the contract. And even the advice from the state broker team at that time has changed now.
Really?
So
So what you mentioned conflicting information and stuff. What's something that you've heard that contradicted or conflicted with previous information?
gosh, I specifically asked our state team a couple weeks ago.
No worries. No worries. If it doesn't.
I think it had more to do with like a lot of sellers too are, and this was the case in my situation, are like testing the water. And they're like, behind the scenes, a seller might tell their list agent, hey, I'd be willing to consider, or I'd be willing to full on pay a buyer's agent commission, but I don't want to put it in the MLS, right? And so my question, I believe, was specific to what paperwork to use in this situation, and if we needed the seller to sign an agreement before we even showed the property. to guarantee that. So like in my case, the seller verbally committed to her agent that she would pay like 2.5%, but she put 0 in the MLS, and that's how she wanted it to be. So at the time, the Oregon State Broker team had me get this in writing, like before we submitted an offer and before I showed the property. And they were like, similar to the buyer broker agreement, they're like, you can't show the property unless the seller signs this, or you just won't get paid down the road, kind of thing.
Interesting. So in Oregon, it's not just part of the offer. Whatever they're offering or not offering.
Yeah, we're actually legally not allowed to state commission on a purchase and sale agreement. So it's very tricky. So when the change rolls out, and we can't have buyer's agent commission on the MLS, right? But in almost every case, I'll call or text the agent before a showing to build that relationship, especially if my client's really interested, right? And for right now, if I see something that's a lower or 0% BAC, I'm calling the agent to, better understand the situation, to get a better feel for things, because I want to, if my client's interested, I want to write a winning offer, something that will work for everybody. So let's just have our ducks in a row first, right? Well, in the past, before this came out, if the seller was going to agree, or if we had like a FSBO or something, we would have the seller pay agreement and we would submit that. Then the seller would sign it, and then we'd write an offer. And now the state team, and I understand this, but it just contradicts what they told me previously. The state team is saying not to do that, because in essence, the seller is going to want to see your offer before they approve a commission, right? Like, what if they receive a lower offer and it goes against their net price? They might not want to offer commission. But if they receive a full price offer or an over asking offer to compensate for that commission, then it makes sense. So I understand both sides. It's just logistically, how do we make it work from the beginning so that we don't have contract issues down the road?
Sure. In the scenario you were just talking about, is like if they agreed to pay 2.5% upfront, and then you submit the offer. If it's like, well, crap, I don't want to pay it with that offer, it just turns into a counteroffer situation. In my mind, they would just counteroffer and say, well, I already agreed I'd pay a commission, but I'm going to counteroffer this offer to make the net sheet work for me, because I'm not going to pay 2.5% on this offer. It's too low. So they would just counter at a higher price, right?
But the state of Oregon doesn't allow us to enter in commission into a purchase and sale agreement.
Eric, how does that differ from Utah?
Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter how it differs in Utah from the way it used to be, since it's changing. But I mean, we are one change that I got from yesterday's class, was it yesterday or Tuesday, whatever. Tuesday, is that when you state the commission with a buyer on a buyer's agreement, that's what you're getting paid. So if you put on there 3% with your buyer, that your agreement at the beginning, and let's say the listing you show them is offering 3.5%, you can't get paid 3.5% anymore. That 0.5% has to go to the seller or the buyer in concessions in some way. I thought that was interesting. But I mean, as far as the listing goes, I mean, you can put whatever commission you want on there when you're listing, to include some room for a buyer's, commission. And one thing that she said that was interesting, that I thought was not necessarily true. She said, this is for the first time, the buyer's commission is now a negotiation piece, which unfortunately has been there a few times in the past, right? For a lot of us. But you can, there's actually an addendum that states, this is at least, the Utah MLS, where you can have your commission stated in the contract, which is interesting. So basically it's an addendum. BAC is 3% or whatever you want to call it. And it becomes part of the negotiation, and the buyer or the seller can say, well, let's just see if he'll take 2% and we'll lower the buyer closing cost to 5,000 instead of 10,000. So it all becomes part of your negotiation, which kind of stinks, I guess, unless you've had that conversation correctly with your buyer. Hey, this isn't changing, regardless of what the seller wants to negotiate on a certain property.
So question for you.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where my biggest question comes in when they talk about these, because the what about if an agent calls you up before they even put an offer to ask what your commission, if they're offering a buyer's agent commission, but then it's all over mouth, right? It's not like in paper, for when it comes to the negotiations, like how would you handle that? Because all of a sudden they do, for instance, what she was just saying, like, if it's part of the negotiations, if they lowball the offer and they're like, well, I don't want to offer that agent commission if they're going to lowball this, and like, how does that come into play when it comes to doing the right thing and still being honest with everyone? You know what I mean? Is it, do you, I don't know. Do you understand my
I
question?
understand what you're saying, for sure.
Okay.
So it's all kind of how you perceive things, kind of like closing costs for forever. We say, hey, the seller paid my closing costs. Well, realistically, the buyer paid the closing costs. They're just wrapping it in the loan, right? So if you have $100,000 property and they're paying $5,000 in closing costs, they would have taken $95,000 without those $5,000 closing costs. So the buyer's really paying for those closing costs in a loan over time. So if you're looking at, the BAC and you have an agreement with the buyer, hey, that your commission is 3%, and that becomes negotiable, during the contract, it's still going to be paid for by the buyer. It's just how the purchase price reflects that, because the seller is going to take into account that commission is being paid, and they're going to counter based on that price. One thing I haven't heard anybody say is, like, when you write an offer to an agent and you say, hey, I'm writing an offer, I've got the 3% commission in the addendum, that part is non-negotiable. I mean, I don't know if you can even say that.
Right. I felt like
Probably
what she said originally, when she said originally, like on the last one, I think, I don't remember who it was with, it was Leo or whatnot, I don't remember. But I remember them saying you can, if they're, say you have 3% on your buyer's agent commission with your buyer, or sorry, on your agreement with your client, and then say they're only offering 2, and what I remember them saying, which I have not heard them say otherwise, but maybe I missed it, is that you can still get paid that 2 instead of the 3. You can, like, negotiate lower, not necessarily negotiate, but you can just take the lower income, but you just can't ask for more, is what my understanding was. Is that still the case though?
No, that is correct.
Okay.
You can't take more, and your buyer's agreement with your buyer has to be specific. You can't put on the buyer's agreement 3% or whatever the seller is offering, because that's not a defined amount. You can't even say BAC is between 2 and 3%, depending on what the seller is offering. That's a bad agreement as well. It has to be defined.
Right.
And who knows, maybe some of this will change over time. There hasn't been any complaints or litigations on any of this yet.
Okay.
So maybe in a year it'll be different, but
So mainly, I just mainly need to tell my buyer that if the agent or if the seller is only offering 2%,
Mhm.
you're going to have to cover that 1% in your loan,
yes,
kind of a thing.
yeah,
Okay. All right.
that'll be your choice at that point. Yeah.
Okay.
You can have that other 1% covered by like seller paid concessions.
Okay.
Like towards closing costs and prepaids, there's specific language for that. I've done the gap thing also.
Okay.
And currently I'm also doing this situation where my buyer broker agreement is 3%, but they're offering 2.5. So I'm just gonna accept 2.5.
Okay.
Right? So I've kind of done it all three ways. What I am seeing also, and I think we should talk about more, and I hope that NARD does some like general training for everybody, is that we might see different things brokerage to brokerage, right? Like I have a new mentee and she just received an offer. She has buyer's agent commission in the MLS. So that's in place, that's in writing. Nothing else is really needed, but the buyer's agent's brokerage is requiring them to also include the seller pay agreement in addition to the MLS.
Hmm.
So I think we are going to see different things from different brokerages, and we'll have to navigate that also because we're all receiving training from our brokerage, not really from NAR. Right?
For sure.
Okay. Well, that's good. Thank you. That's helpful.
I think probably one of the big things to be really aware of is if a listing agent says, yeah, I'm paying 2.5% on this, the MLS is going to state 0. So that's a verbal agreement. So if you write an offer and you don't have that agreement with that listing agent that the BAC is going to be part of that contract, then it becomes the buyer's responsibility to pay you. So you got to be really, really aware of that. You know, it's like, well, we don't have anything in writing, so the seller doesn't want to honor that verbal agreement that the listing agent gave you. It's got to be written in somewhere that they're going to pay that, because it's because you have just like always, when you have a buyer's agreement, that buyer's agreement has nothing to do with the listing. It's they agree to pay you for your services. So if they go get a for sale by owner, technically they owe you that commission that they agreed to. So it's always with the buyer, not the seller. It just states in the agreement that if there's a commission offered on your MLS that you're a member of that's posted on that MLS, then you are going to get paid that amount. Well, that amount that's going to get paid is now 0. So here's your 0.
Shante, I have a question specific because your state is different. So in Utah, we also have an escrow instructions form that can be broker to broker where they fill it out and they say, here it outlines what each party is going to be paid. Now, if I wanted a seller to sign escrow instructions for me, they don't even have to fill out the part what they're going to get paid because contractually I don't really care. But if they fill out the buyer's part and they say a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price, that's an broker to broker escrow instructions. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the REPC, although I've done it both ways. You can send it over to the broker and say, hey, I've got a great offer for you. I'm going to send it over, but I want to talk about this commission first. And they can sign and say, yep, we agree to pay 3% BAC. That's an agreement broker to broker. Now you send over the offer, they can negotiate the offer, whatever. I've also done it to where I've sent over the offer with escrow instructions and said the attached escrow instructions are to be considered an integral part of this offer, which ties it together with my purchase contract. And now it's just like an addendum. We have new forms now, but I'm wondering in your state if you couldn't do the previous example that I gave and send over an escrow instructions form and get them to commit or agree to a commission. And that way it really wouldn't be part of your purchase contract. Like you said, you're not allowed to do. Is that an option for you up there?
I don't think so, and I don't know if it matters, but isn't it true that in Utah you can have two separate escrow companies for the same transaction?
Yes, a lot,
Yeah.
it's more common than not that the seller and the buyer use separate.
So we have to have one, like one escrow company and team per transaction.
Mhm.
So we do have a form called Notice of Real Estate Compensation that we complete, but that's like towards the end. Like I complete that after EXP sends out the CDA, which is usually 7 days before closing. So it's not part of the original contract. And the notice of real estate compensation is not signed by the other side. It's only signed by our state broker.
Interesting. So it's just a notice to the title company.
Yeah, just to have something in writing.
So you don't have a form that is an agreement between the two brokerages on what the commission's
No,
gonna be?
I mean, it will end up coming out in the estimated settlement statement and then the final, and we all review that, but that's much later in the process, right? That's at closing. So no, The only thing I can think of what I would like to do to close the gap is if I'm not allowed to include it on the sale agreement, I want to include the seller pay addendum as part of the arrangement, right? But our state broker team is currently telling me like that I can't do that or not to do that or something, and I'm like, I just don't understand. I don't understand why not, because I think that it covers the gaps.
So at this point, you kind of have to just call it a concession, you know, seller to contribute up to X amount towards buyer paid closing costs, and then your buyer.
Right,
towards your
right,
commission.
and thankfully, at least like FHA released, because at first, like the first couple weeks, we still could only ask for up to a certain percentage, right, based on their payment.
Right.
So if my buyer needed the full 3% that they were allowed for concessions, there was no room for additional commission as part of that,
Yep.
So now that FHA has released that, that's great. We just have to state it in a way that it will, go through both brokerages and the escrow company and the lender. So I put the language together and I send it to all the parties and make sure it's good before finalizing anything.
Nice. Well, this is new and it's gonna go through some adoption periods and tweaking and probably clarification. There's still some confusion in the industry, obviously, and with broker to broker and state to state, it kind of adds to it, especially when you're listening to the NAR stuff and then you're saying, well, we can't do that here in Oregon,
Seems like that escrow instructions might be a good option that way. Jeff, I've done that before where I've included the escrow instructions as part of the purchase contract. But on escrow instructions, it doesn't require the buyer to sign it. Do you have the buyer sign it when you include it?
Well, contractually, I mean, you look at a bilateral or unilateral contract or whatever, if you're trying to commit and hold the seller or the seller's agent and their brokerage to pay you the commission, if they sign it, that's enforceable, right? It doesn't require even a presentation signature from the buyer or whatever. The seller's already agreed in writing that they're going to pay that out. So that's really what you want. I mean, to give you an example, let's say Lynn did a lease agreement and the buyer signed, or I mean, the tenant signed it, but Lynn didn't sign it. That lease agreement is not even enforceable against the landlord for whatever language is in there and their commitments in that lease because she never signed it. But Lynn can enforce it against the tenant because they did sign it. So it's important to get both parties to agree. But when you're asking one party to perform, think of it like an option. I want the option to do something. And so if the seller or the other party gives me that option, even if I didn't sign it, I still have the right to exercise that because they gave it to me. So same thing with the commission. You want them to sign and commit to pay your buyer the buyer brokers the commission. So without your signature is still enforceable.
I'm not looking for a loophole. This isn't what I'm going after here, but it seems like to me, if you included the escrow instructions and only the listing side needs to sign it, the buyer doesn't. It really kind of takes that buyer out of that situation in a way.
Well, you should have a separate buyer agency agreement with your buyer, so
Right.
which
Yeah.
states that if it's paid for by the seller, then it satisfies their agreement. So they're still
Yeah.
on the hook to pay you.
I guess what I'm saying is you're not putting in an addendum that goes to the listing agent, your buyer, is it's just, it seems like it's a little bit more covert, and I'm not saying
It
that's
could be.
a good thing. But, when if you have an escrow instructions agreed to, then that sticks. Where if you have your commission in an addendum, that becomes part of the negotiation piece more.
Correct. Because if you do the escrow instructions outside of the purchase contract, or they agree to it, that part's already settled. Now let's work on the other terms.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example the other way. And Eric, you may know of this example. I was $20,000 apart from my buyer making a cash purchase on a property and what the seller wanted. So the listing agent came to me and said, hey, we're $20,000 apart. So if you reduce your commission 5,000, I'll reduce my commission 5,000. If the buyer will come up 5,000 and my client will come down 5, we're all contributing $5,000. Let's put this together. And I told him, dude, I've never given a seller $5,000 of my commission ever. And he goes, well, we want to really put the, so he went on with his spiel and what he thought would work. And I said, tell you what, put it in writing, send it over. I'll discuss with my client. We'll see what we can put together. So he sends over an addendum, changing the purchase price to my client's contribution, just coming up $5,000. Afterwards, the escrow instructions came over asking me to reduce my commission $5,000 and stated what my new commission was. And I never signed it. So we went under contract at the new addendum price where my client just came up $5,000. Not a word was spoken of it until closing disclosures came out. And he called me and I said, hey, I'm looking at the closing disclosures. It's wrong because it shows you're getting paid too much. And we agreed that you would come down 5,000. And I said, actually, you presented for me to come down 5,000. It wasn't part of the counter offer you sent over from my client, and I never agreed to that. I never even told you verbally I would do that. I told you I've never done that before. And so he messed up. He did not connect it to that addendum and state this is part of the counter offer. It became a separate little negotiable item, and he didn't and I collected the full commission. It was just kind of a principle thing for me to not that I feel it's my responsibility to teach lessons to people and stuff, but that's $5,000 that I didn't agree to. And I didn't feel like I was that charitable to just give him $5,000 because he messed up. And so he had to work that out with his seller, however they did it, whether the seller relieved him of that obligation or reduced his commission another 5,000, I don't know. But that's just an example of how they can be negotiated separately or make sure it's tied together as a negotiable item that all parties are aware of. Awesome. Let's
I'll mention a couple other things too.
Okay.
First of all, the July 1st date got kicked back to August 17th.
Right.
So that's important. And then also, yes, we have to have some agreement for every buyer that looks at a house. But at this point, open houses are excluded. So we're not having everybody sign something when they walk into an open house. Michelle made a good point yesterday, though. There may be agents out there that use this as an advantage, and everyone that comes into an open house, they might say, hey, because of new NAR regulations, I have to have you sign this agreement. So just be careful of that when you send somebody out to, or you have a buyer that's out there looking at open houses, make sure that you have something in place with them where they know not to sign anything at an open house because they do not have to. So just a side thought.
Yep, that's perfect. Maybe we could even bring this up for discussion if it's part of our presentation today in our training, preparing for settlements by Tucker Hutchison. I'm sure that's gonna be part of the topic, you know, setting proper expectations. We're gonna take the next week off because it's July 4th. Ashley and I are actually gonna do one the following week together on building a referral-based business. You can see after that, we've got a panel discussion with Brianna Greenwood and Emmanuel. He's a physical trainer, a lot of mindset stuff. We had Anthony, my chiropractor, scheduled to be the third person on the panel, but he had a conflict. His sister-in-law is getting married that next day or something. He's flying out of state. So we're going to replace him hopefully soon with another panelist.
So if you guys have anyone in kind
I
of
have somebody that can do that. If you need somebody.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, let's chat about that. We haven't committed to anybody yet, so that'd be great. Ashley, I'm gonna skip forward to you since it's 10:15, so we can get set up for our training. Give us some of your thoughts here.
Okay, so something that's been top of my mind lately, and I don't know if I've already brought it up or not, but the quote that I chose was success is achieved by developing our strengths, not by eliminating our weaknesses. And it's been top of my mind. I started doing Shayna's coaching program, and she had me take the Clifton Strengths Assessment in the very beginning. And it was interesting for me because I honestly, like, I didn't even know what my strengths were. Because you think your strengths are one thing, but then it's like you actually like put it on paper and like look at what your strengths are, and then you start to notice them more in your life. And so I just wanted to like bring that up of like, let's, you know, focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses, because it's super easy to focus on like what you're not good at. I mean, that's how our brains are wired, right? To find, you know, the negative. And so I would recommend, if any of you haven't, to take the Clifton Strengths Assessment and find out what your top 5 strengths are, because then what's really cool is you just start to notice those strengths. Yeah, that's the book. You start to notice those strengths throughout your day, and like then just really get to hone in on your strengths and improve those instead of trying to like bring up your weaknesses. So that was kind of just what I wanted to talk about today, was just a focus on strengths versus weaknesses.
Have any of you taken a test like that before? I haven't. I need to take this one.
Yeah, I have. I've gone through Shayna's program.
Oh, nice. Was that helpful for you to get that?
It was very enlightening.
So it was different than what you anticipated as well then?
Oh yeah, for sure. Some of them were predictable, but I think they put it in a way that kind of made it sound like a good thing, not necessarily a weakness. Because how I was looking at it is like my strengths are my weaknesses, and that really finding a lot of faults and things like that, you know. But it kind of helped, like, you know, you can turn these into even like live it up is mainly kind of what I got out of it, you know, just like live, you know, this is your strength, use it, and or utilize it in your life, and think of these as positive things, not weaknesses. And so
Interesting. So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that you had a weakness, but you thought it was a strength.
no, beforehand I thought my strengths were weaknesses.
Oh,
and now I'm like, now I feel like, okay, those are actually my strengths, not my weaknesses.
I can give a good example of that. So just like talking about like negotiation process and things through a real estate transaction, I always felt like one of my weaknesses was negotiation, because I don't like confrontation. And so I was really focused on the fact that I didn't like confrontation, and was like, well, I'm not going to be good at that, or I'm not good at that because I'm not confrontational. But one of my top 5 strengths is harmony. And so in listening to that and reading more about that, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'm not great at confrontation, but I am really good about taking 2 sides that are like not coming together and bringing them together. And so it helped me look at that as a strength versus a weakness, because before I was like, oh, this is not my strength, but in actuality, it was a strength. It's just looking at it in a different way.
Awesome.
Yeah. I love it.
Cool.
Anything else you want to say on
Do
that?
you have anything for us to pay attention to?
Well, kind of what I would love everybody to take like the test, because I feel like that is totally.
Is it online?
It's just online. But I guess the one thing that you can do if you're, not gonna go take the assessment is, kind of like what Hillary was saying, is kind of point out like 3 of your things that you see as a weakness and actually reframe those to be strengths. So I'm trying to think of like an example of one of mine that I had. I think one of my weaknesses that I felt like I had, that I've had people tell me that I'm not very like emotional, like I don't show a lot of emotion, and I kind of reframed that as to that I'm able to come from like a different perspective, and kind of look at all the perspectives and not like get emotional about it. So yeah, just maybe take like 3 things that you think are your weaknesses and reframe them to be strengths. That would be my focus for you.
Awesome. And how do we find the test online?
It's just Clifton Strengths Assessment. I can put it in the note.
Clifton Strength Assessment.
I can put it in.
How long should it take?
Maybe a half hour.
No.
Yeah.
Because the questions are set up in a way that you only have a certain number of seconds to answer them, because it wants you to answer based off of your first thought. So if you don't answer it within like 5 seconds, it like times out and moves on to the next one. So you have to go through it quickly.
If you don't answer in 5 seconds, it's automatically a weakness.
I guess so.
Just means you're undecided.
Decisiveness. Weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah, decisiveness is not a strength.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to your mind is the way it actually is, because I can see how you get lost in your thoughts on how you're trying to be, or how you wish you were, or like, overthinking a strength or a weakness and trying to redefine it instead of just answering. But I can see that. That'd be an interesting exercise.
Mhm.
We didn't really go over like, if anybody had anything that they wanted to talk about today. We talked about, like,
I know, I thought you were gonna take a little bit more time than that, so I kind of jumped to the end so we could get that in.
does anybody have anything that they wanted to talk about? Any wins or anything that you're struggling with that you want some advice on? Before we wrap up, or we can just wrap up.
Everything I had for that was just the NAR stuff. I was going to bring that up during that. So
Perfect.
well done.
Well done. Alrighty, got anything on this, Eric? Agent attraction, we haven't even really talked about that in a minute.
Yeah. No, nothing specific today. Yeah, we haven't talked about it in a few weeks, huh?
Yeah, no worries. Cool.
Oh, you know what? I do have something on this. I was actually thinking about it earlier. If just kind of a reminder, we have real estate dues coming up for us that are basically due in a few days, or I guess July 31st is the late day. Just a reminder, if you hear of anyone that is considering putting their license on hold or not renewing, EXP does have the commercial referral division that is only $50 a month, and you don't have to be a member of the Board of Realtors, NAR, the MLS, your key box service, any of those things. You just become a referral agent. So I think that's a great opportunity. If you know someone, or if you hear somebody that's saying they're going to hang up their license, put them in the commercial referral division, because then if they have 3 or 4 months from now, they're going to get a referral. Hey, you still doing real estate? And they're like, dang it, I don't have any of my stuff is active, my license is inactive, they can't do anything. But if they're just part of the referral program, they can say, yeah, I can help you out. I can actually work with, whoever, Shantae or Hillary, and they can help you out. Then you can at least get a 25% commission referral.
Yeah.
straight from EXP. So just keep that in mind as we're coming to the renewal stage. It's a great way to, yeah.
Go inactive or letting it lapse.
Yeah, it's just, I think the more people that know about that coming into renewal, because that's for a lot of agents, that's decision time. Am I going to re-up another year and pay all these fees when I've only closed 1 or 2 transactions last year and I have nothing in the pipeline? It's certainly something to think about. And it'd be a great way to, grow some of your EXP revenue share team through referral partners like that.
That's perfect. Awesome. This is the time of year to keep that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
Renewals. This is
Yep.
a big turnover in the industry. Happening.
Yep, for sure. And people aren't aware of it, obviously,
All right, guys. Love
Bye,
you
guys.
all.
Oh,
Have a good day.
see you
Okay,
soon.
thank you.